Hey guys, no 4 o'clock a.m. reading for me today. I'm going to finish this book up for you. You can hear that. That's my son vacuuming. Interesting note. I'm trying to get my daughter to learn how to play Turn, Turn, Turn by the Birds that I posted on Google Classroom today on her ukulele. So if she figures that out, I'm going to make her play for you. But she's kind of hateful, so she's like a shy little bird. So we'll see if she will. I hope you were able to listen to the song. Kind of poetic, a little powerful, especially since right now, while Montag is with all of the professors, all these kind of misfits on the railroad tracks, the world is kind of coming to an end in a way. A new world war has started. We know that something bad is on the way. If you haven't already noticed, as Ray Bradbury talks about constant, like the fighter jets constantly going overhead and how they continue to get more and more, that's some really good foreshadowing of essentially the end of the world or something really serious happening at the end of the book. So another really interesting thought is that the smartest people in the world, the people that should be valued more than anyone else, are living on railroad tracks while and just kind of memorizing books and doing the best they can until everything kind of implodes on itself, and then they hope to restart the world in a way. Whereas these ignorant people that we usually wouldn't value as intelligent and vital to society are living it up in cities and hurting each other, killing each other, spending so much time in entertainment. So it's funny that what we value today as success, you know, people that have these amazing degrees and are incredibly intelligent, and many times we find them almost like we're kind of intimidated by them. These are the people in this book who are seen as weirdos, seen as people that don't fit into society. So they're misfits in a way. And if you are somebody that doesn't read and just kind of enjoys pleasure, enjoys not thinking, then you're the norm. So this is a society that's been created because people essentially don't want to challenge themselves in any kind of intellectual way. So, I mean, you know, you guys have seen all those things on Facebook and Instagram about when the quarantine's lifted, we're going to be a better people for it. I was listening to a devotional the other day that talked about how you come out of this situation, this crisis, is up to you. You can either choose to come out of this situation a better person, the same person you came into it, or worse. So I'm hoping that I'm going to be a better person because of this, a better wife, a better mother, a better delegator of time, and a better teacher. So we'll see. I'm hoping. It's my guess and my hope. So we'll find out. But I miss you guys. And I know I need to get my books back from you at some point. My ideal was to set a box up at the high school in the foyer and put candy in it, and you could drop your book off and get some Easter candy, because I bought you guys Easter candy hoping we'd be back. And I started filling eggs, and then, you know, obviously. So anyway, now I'm just rambling. So, but okay, 147. Tomorrow we will have a quiz over the end of the book. So let's go ahead and get this started. They stood by the river in the starlight. Montag saw the luminous dial of his waterproof. 5 o'clock in the morning. Another year ticked by in a single hour, and dawn waiting beyond the far bank of the river. "Why do you trust me?" said Montag. A man moved in the darkness. "The look of you's enough. You haven't seen yourself in a mirror lately. Beyond that, the city has never cared so much about us to bother with an elaborate chase like this to find us. A few crackpots with verses in their heads can't touch them, and they know it and we know it. Everybody knows it. So long as the vast population doesn't wander about quoting the Magna Carta and the Constitution, it's all right. The firemen were enough to check that now and then. No, the cities don't bother with us. And you look like hell. They moved along the bank of the river going south. Montag tried to see the men's faces, the old faces he remembered from the firelight, lined and tired. He was looking for brightness, a resolve, a triumph over tomorrow that hardly seemed to be there. Perhaps he had expected their faces to burn and glitter with the knowledge they carried, to glow as lanterns glow with the light in them. But all the light had come from the campfire, and these men had seemed no different than any others who had run a long race, searched a long search, seen good things destroyed, and now, very late, were gathered to wait for the end of the party and the blowing out of the lamps. They weren't at all certain that the things they carried in their heads might make every future dawn glow with the pure light. They were sure of nothing save that the books were on file behind their quiet eyes. The books were waiting, with their pages uncut, for the customers who might come by in later years, some with clean and some with dirty fingers. How intense is that? I love that description, that these men have memorized the books and they're inside their brains and they're just waiting for one day in the future for someone to come by and with clean or dirty hands grab inside of their brains and want to read what they have memorized. Essentially meaning someone's going to walk by and want to know about a book and they will be able to tell them. Montag squinted from one face to the other as they walked. "Don't judge a book by its cover," somebody said, and they all laughed quietly, moving downstream. There was a shriek, and the jets from the city were gone overhead long before the men looked up. Montag stared back at the city, far down the river, only a faint glow now. "My wife's back there." "Sorry to hear that. The cities won't do well in the next few days," said Granger. "You know, it's strange. I don't miss her. It's strange I don't feel much of anything," said Montag. "Even if she dies, I realized a moment ago I don't think I'd feel sad. It isn't right. Something must be wrong with me." "Listen," said Granger, taking his arm and walking with him, holding aside the bushes to let him pass. "When I was a boy, my grandfather died. I'm going to get emotional. And you're just going to have to deal with it because this person's an emotional person. What should I think about this? When I was a boy, my grandfather died and he was a sculptor. He was also a very kind man who had a lot of love to give the world. And he helped clean up the slum in our town, and he made toys, and he did a million things in his lifetime. He was always busy with his hands. And when he died, I suddenly realized I wasn't crying for him at all, but for all the things he did. I cried because he would never do them again. He would never carve another piece of wood or help us raise doves and pigeons in the backyard or play the violin the way he did or tell us jokes the way he did. He was a part of us, and when he died, all the action stopped dead. And there was no one to do them just the way he did. He was an individual. He was an important man. I'd never gotten over his death. Often I think what a wonderful carvings never came to birth because he died. How many jokes are missing from the world, and how many homing pigeons untouched by his hands. He shaped the world. He did things to the world. The world was bankrupt of 10 million fine actions the night he passed on. Oh, how powerful is that? When you lose somebody you love, yes, you miss them, but you grieve for all the things they won't do anymore. All the people they won't help. All the things they won't do. It's a grief process. And I think that's so powerful. His grandfather was such an amazing man that he grieved for all of the paintings he would not paint. He grieved for all the sculpture, the clay that he would not mold. he was sad. That just breaks my heart. And it's so true. I mean, we miss our people because they're our people. But I think about my own mother and how, she would never paint again. She would never see my kids and be able to tell them that she's proud of them. Like, I grieve for the actions that the world misses because she's not here. Montag walked in silence. Millie, he whispered. Millie. What? My wife, poor Millie. Poor Millie. I can't remember anything. I think of her hands, but I don't see them doing anything at all. They just hung there at her side, or they lie there on her lap, or there's a cigarette in them. That's all. Montag turned and glanced back. What did you give the city, Montag? Ashes? What did the others give to each other? Nothingness. Granger stood looking back at Montag. Everyone must leave something behind when he dies, my grandfather said. A child, or a book, or a painting, or a house, or a wall built, or a pair of shoes made, or a garden planted. Something your hand touched some way so your soul has somewhere to go when you die. And when people look at that tree or that flower you planted, you're there. It doesn't matter what you do, he said, so as long as you change something from the way it was before you touched it into something that's like you after you take your hands away. The difference between the man who just cuts lawns and a real gardener is in the touching, he said. The lawn cutter may just as well not have been there at all. The gardener will be there a lifetime. Granger moved his hand. My grandfather showed me some V2 rocket films once, 50 years ago. Have you ever seen the atomic bomb mushroom from 200 miles up? It's a pinprick. It's nothing, with the wilderness all around it. My grandfather ran over the V2 rocket film a dozen times and then hoped that someday our cities would open up more and let the green and let the land and let the wilderness in more, to remind people that we're allotted a little space on earth and that we survive in that wilderness that can take back what it has given as easily as blowing its breath on us or sending the sea to us. We are not so big. When we forget how close the wilderness is in the night, my grandfather said, someday it will come in and get us, for we will have forgotten how terrible and how real it can be, you see? I think about this when the tornado hit. I always felt like I controlled the weather. I know that sounds crazy, but I always felt like we had an understanding, the weather and I. Like when it was really bad, we wouldn't have school and I would just do my thing at home. And if things weren't canceled, I'd go out and live. I never discerned that maybe the weather was bad and that the earth didn't care at all about me, that it was doing its thing and I was just surviving in it. I always thought in a way I controlled it. I know that sounds crazy. So when the tornado happened, I felt like I had been kind of, I don't know, like nature had screwed me over. Like we had an unspoken agreement. It wasn't going to impede on my fabulous life and I was just going to let it be and, recycle and all will be well. I didn't realize nature don't care about me. And it could plow me down and plow this house down and I would have nothing. At the end of the day, we have no control over anything in our lives if we really think about it. The decisions other people make are going to control our lives. The decisions of the government, the decisions of nature, that always shocked me. I couldn't believe how dumb I was to think that like there was this natural agreement between me and the earth that it was going to do its thing and I was going to do my thing and it was going to protect me. How ignorant is that, right? But I think a lot of us feel that way. Here's my favorite part of the whole book. Grandfather's been dead all these years, but if you lifted my skull, by God, in the convolutions of my brain, you'd find the big ridges of his thumbprint. He touched me. As I said earlier, he was a sculptor. I hate a Roman named Status Quo, he said to me. Stuff your eyes with wonder, he said. Live as if you drop dead in 10 seconds. See the world. It's more fantastic than any dream made or paid for in a factory. Ask no guarantees. Ask for no security. There never was such an animal. And if there were, it would be related to the great sloth which hangs upside down in a tree all day, every day, sleeping its life away. To hell with that, he'd said. Shake the tree and knock the great sloth down on its ass. I love it. His grandpa hated status quo, people that just lived life like this. He said, you gotta live. And I love that picture of, we've all had somebody really special die in our lives. And if you were to cut our head open and lift our skull, you could look in our brain and you could see on that brain an imprint of the person we love's fingerprints all over us. They're in it. Oh, I love that. Okay, can you tell I miss you guys too much? Sorry. I should probably not read this most emotional part of the book after only having 2 hours of sleep last night. I'm sorry. I'm not crazy, I promise. But how poetic is that? Live. Live your life. That's what my mom told me right before she died. She said, you've got to live. Push yourself. Be scared. Get out of your comfort zone. She said she never did that, and she wanted that for me. I love that. Look, cried Montag, and the war began and ended in that instant. It's so interesting how Ray Bradbury is so wordy, and he will explain something crazy for 3 paragraphs, and then literally a city is demolished by bombs. And he says it in a sentence. And the war began and ended in that instant. Later, the men around Montag could not say if they had really seen anything. Perhaps the merest flourish of light and motion in the sky. Perhaps the bombs were there and the jets 10 miles, 5 miles, 1 mile up. And for the merest instant, like grain thrown over the heavens by a great sewing hand, and the bombs drifting with dreadful swiftness, yet sudden slowness, down upon the mourning city that had left behind. The bombardment was, to all intents and purposes, finished. Once the jets had sighted their target, alerted their bombardier about 5,000 miles an hour, as quick as the whisper of a Scythe, the war was finished. Once the bomb release was yanked, it was over. Now a full 3 seconds, all the time in history before the bombs struck, the enemy ships themselves were gone half around the visible world, like bullets in which a savage islander might not believe because they were invisible. Yet the heart is suddenly shattered, the body falls in separate motions, and the blood is astonished to be free on the air. The brain squanders its few precious memories and, puzzled, dies. This was not to be believed. It was merely a gesture. Montag saw a flint of great metal fist over the far city, and he knew the scream of the jets that would follow would say, after the deed, disintegrate. Leave no stone on another. Perish. Die. Montag held the bombs in the sky for a single moment with his mind and his hands reaching helplessly up at them. Run! He cried to Faber, to Clarice. Run! To Mildred. Get out of there! But Clarice, he remembered, was dead. And Faber was out, there in the deep valleys of the country somewhere, and a 5 a.m. bus was on his way from one desolation to another. Though the desolation had not yet arrived, was still in the air, it was certain a man could make it. Before the bus had run another 50 yards on the highway, its destination would be meaningless, and its point of departure changed from metropolis to junkyard. So we don't know if Faber made it. He did get on the bus. Whether or not he was a part of the bomb, we're not sure. But essentially, either way, he is not going to any city. St. Louis is going to be destroyed. All of the cities are destroyed. The war is wiping out everything at this moment. And Mildred, get out, run. He saw her in her hotel room somewhere now, and a half a second remaining with the bombs a yard, a foot, an inch from her building. He saw her leaning towards the great shimmering walls of colors and motions where the family talked and talked and talked to her, where the family prattled and chatted and said her name and smiled at her and said nothing of the bomb that was an inch. Now a half an inch, now a quarter of an inch from the top of the hotel, leaning into the wall as if all the hunger of looking would find the secret of her sleepless unease there. Mildred, leaning anxiously, nervously, as if to plunge or drop, fall into that swarming immensity of color to drown in its bright happiness. The first bomb struck. Mildred! Perhaps, who would ever know? Perhaps the great broadcasting station with their beams of color and light and talk and chatter went burst into oblivion. Montag, falling flat, going down, saw or felt or imagined he saw or felt the walls go dark in Millie's face. Heard her screaming, because in the millionth part of the time left, she saw her own face reflected there in a great mirror instead of a crystal ball, and it was such a wildly empty face, all by itself in a room, touching nothing, starving and eating of itself, that at last she recognized it as her own and looked quickly up at the ceiling, as it and the entire structure of the hotel blasted down upon her, carrying her with 1,000,000 pounds of brick and metal and plaster and wood to meet other people in the hives below, all on their quick way down to the cellar where the explosion rid itself of them in their own unreasonable way. And Millie dies. Millie dies alone. Millie dies empty. Millie dies a person who did not change the world, did not touch anyone's skull, did not leave any print on anyone. I remember Montag clung to the earth. I remember Chicago a long time ago. Millie and I, that's where we met. I remember now. Chicago, a long time ago. Oh, he remembers where they met. Why? Why then? The concession knocked the air across and down the river, turned the men over like dominoes in a line, blew the water in the lifting sprays, and blew the dust and made the trees above them mourn with great wind passing away south. Montag crushed himself down, squeezing himself small, eyes tight. He blinked once, and in that instant saw the city, instead of the bombs in the air. They had displaced each other. For another of those impossible instants the city stood, rebuilt and unrecognizable, taller than it had ever hoped or strived to be, taller than man had built it, erected at last in gouts of shattered concrete and sparkles of torn metal into the mural hung like a reversed avalanche. 1,000,000 colors, 1,000,000 oddities, a door where a window should be, a top for a bottom, a side for a back, and then the city rolled over and fell down dead. Personification. The city is gone. It is destroyed. It is toppled. The sound of its death came after. Montag, lying there, eyes gritted shut with dust, a fine wet cement of dust in his now shut mouth, grasping and crying, now thought again, I remember something else. What is it? Yes, part of Ecclesiastes and Revelations, part of that book, part of it, quick now, quick, before it gets away, before the shock wears off, before the wind dies, book of Ecclesiastes. Here, he said it over to himself silently, Lying flat to the trembling earth, he said the words of it many times, and they were perfect without trying, and there was no Denham's dentifrice anywhere. It was just the preacher by himself, standing there in his mind, looking at him. "There," said a voice. The men lay gasping like fish laid out on the grass. They held the earth as a child holds familiar things. No matter how dead or cold, no matter what had happened or what will happen, their fingers were clawed into the dirt. And they were all shouting to keep their eardrums from bursting, to keep their sanity from bursting, mouths open, Montag shouting with them a protest against the wind that ripped their faces and tore at their lips, making their noses bleed. So I just want to remind you guys, they're out of town, but this city has just been destroyed by intense, we could probably say atomic-like bombs, right? So although they're outside of town, the blast knocks them down. It's so loud they can't hear. Their faces are meshed back by the wind. They're covered in dust. They are they're almost destroyed as well. Montag watched the great dust settle and the great silence move down upon their world. And lying there, it seemed that he saw every single grain of dust and every blade of grass, and that he heard every cry and every shout and every whisper going up in the world now. Silence fell down in the sifting dust, and all the leisure they might need to look around to gather the reality of this day into their senses. Montag looked at the river. "We'll go on the river." He looked at the old railroad tracks. "Or we'll go that way. Or we'll walk on the highways now, and we'll have time to put things into ourselves. And someday, after it sets in us a long time, it'll come out of our hands and our mouths. And a lot of it will be wrong, but just enough of it will be right. We'll just start walking today and see the world and the way the world walks around and talks, the way it really looks. I want to see everything now. And while none of it will be me when it goes in, after a while it'll all gather together inside and it'll be me. Look at the world out there. My God, look at it out there. Outside of me, out there beyond my face, and only way to really touch it is to put it where it's finally me, where it's in blood, where it pumps around 1,000 times 10,000 a day. I'll get a hold of it so it'll never run off. I'll hold on to the world tight someday. I've got one finger on it now. That's a beginning." The wind died. The other men lay a while on the dawn's edge of sleep, not yet ready to rise up and begin the day's obligations. Its fires and foods, its 1,000 details of putting foot after foot and hand after hand. They lay blinking their dusty eyelids. You could hear them breathing fast, then slower, then slow. Montag sat up. He did not move any farther, however. The other men did likewise. The sun was touching the black horizon with a faint red tip. The air was cold and smelled of coming rain. Silently, Granger rose, felt of his arms and legs, swearing incessantly under his breath, tears dripping from his face. He shuffled down to the river to look upstream. "It's flat," he said, a long time after. "City looks like a heap of baking powder. It's gone." And a long time after that, "I wonder how many knew it was coming. I wonder how many were surprised." And across the world, thought Montag, how many other cities dead? And here in our country, how many? 100? 1,000? Someone struck a match and touched it to the piece of dry paper taken from their pocket, and shoved this under a bit of grass and leaves, and after a while added a tiny twig which was wet and sputtered but finally caught. And the fire grew larger in the early morning as the sun came up, and the men slowly turned from looking upriver and were drawn to the fire awkwardly, with nothing to say, and the sun colored the backs of their necks as they bent down. Granger unfolded an oilskin with some bacon in it. "We'll have a bite, and then we'll turn around and walk upstream. They'll be needing us up that way." Someone produced a small frying pan, and the bacon went into it, and the frying pan was set on fire. After a moment, the bacon began to flutter and dance in the pan, and sputter of it filled, and the sputter of it filled the morning air with an aroma. The men watched the ritual silently. Granger looked into the fire. Phoenix. What? There's this damn silly old bird called a phoenix back before Christ. Every few hundred years he'd build a pry and burned himself up. He must have been first cousin to man, but every time he burned himself up, he sprang out of the ashes. He got himself born all over again. So it's a Greek mythological idea that the phoenix is born from ashes, that it's a bird, it's a rebirth of a kind that burns and comes out of the ashes. And if you've seen, if you've done any of the, what's the book? You guys are telling me right now, with the Burning Bright, the Phoenix, Hunger Games, right? Yeah. And that's essentially what he's talking about. This is a rebirth for man. It is like a phoenix. They are coming out of the ashes. Everything has been leveled, and we have to start new. And it looks like we're doing the same thing over and over, but we've got one damn thing that phoenix never had. We know the damn silly thing we just did. We know all the damn silly things we've done for 1,000 years, and as long as we know that and always have it around where we can see it, someday we'll stop making the same damn funeral pyres and jumping in the middle of them. We'll pick up a few more people that remember every generation. He took the pan off the fire and let the bacon cool, and they ate it slowly and thoughtfully. Now, let's go on upstream, said Granger, and hold on to one thought. You are not important. You're not anything. Someday the load we're carrying with us may help someone. But even when we had the books in our hands a long time ago, we didn't use what we got out of them. We went right on insulting the dead. We went right on spitting in the graves of all the poor ones who died before us. We're going to meet a lot of lonely people in the next week, and the next month, and the next year. And when they ask us what we're doing, you can say, we're remembering. That's where we'll win out in a long run. And someday we'll remember so much that we'll build the biggest damn steam shovel in history and dig the biggest grave of all and shove war in that grave and cover it up. Come on now. We're going to go build a mirror factory first and put out nothing but mirrors for the next year and take a long look in them. So they're not really going to build a mirror factory. They are going to be the mirrors. They want to teach people that they have to learn from this, that they can't keep being this way and continuing to rise from the ashes like a phoenix. They have to learn from their mistakes. It cannot always lead to destruction. You have to learn. They finished eating and put out the fire. The day was brightening up all about them as if a pink lamp had been given more wick. In the trees, the birds that had flown away quickly now came back and settled down. Montag began walking, and after a moment found that the others had fallen in behind him, going north. He was surprised and moved alongside to let Granger pass, but Granger looked at him and nodded him on. Montag went ahead. He looked at the river and the sky and the rusting track going back down to where the farms lay, where the barns stood full of hay, where a lot of people had walked by in the night on their way from the city. Later, in a month or 6 months, and certainly not more than a year, he would walk along here again, alone, and keep right on going until he caught up with the people. But now there was a long morning's walk until noon, and if the men were silent, it was because there was everything to think about and much to remember. Perhaps later in the morning, when the sun was up and had warmed them, they would begin to talk, or just say the things they remembered, to be sure that they were there, to be absolutely certain that things were safe in them. Montag felt the slow stir of words, the slow simmer. And when it came his turn, what would he say? What could he offer on a day like this to make a trip a little easier? To everything, there is a season. Yes. A time to break down and a time to build up. Yes. A time to keep silent and a time to speak. Yes, all that. But what else? What else? Something. And on the other side of the river, there was a tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. And the leaves of the trees were for the healing of the nations. Yes, thought Montag. That's the one I'll save for noon. For noon. When we reach the city. So when he talks about everything there is a season, that's Ecclesiastes, that's chapter 3, like verses 3 through 7. And that's also that song that I posted today. This idea that everything there is a season. There is a time to, break down and a time to build up. There's a time to live and a time to die. There's a time to reap and there's a time to sow. Some of the best advice I ever received from my husband is that all seasons aren't perfect, but you go through all seasons. And in this season, we're struggling, but that doesn't mean that this season's going to last forever. When he talks about this italicized area, this is also from the Bible, Revelations, and on either side of the river, there was a tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month. And that leaves of the trees were for the healing of the nations. Everything is destroyed, but everything will be given proper due to survive. It's an allusion, it's a reference. This whole portion is a reference in historical significance in literature. In literature, it's called an allusion. It's kind of like when you allude to something in history when you're talking. If you guys remember when Miss A had you guys analyze that oh my goodness, lamb to the slaughter. Lamb to the slaughter is actually an allusion. It alludes to Jesus being a sacrificial lamb, an innocent creature that is killed for the good of everyone. That's an allusion. When you allude to something without actually saying Jesus. And this is also alluding to things within the creation of earth. I talked way too much today. I cried way too much today. I miss you guys. You are going to have your quiz tomorrow. It's quiz 3. You can use your book, so don't freak out if directions say don't use your book. You can use your book. And then we will be starting on a new unit on Monday. Hold on to your books for now. I'll figure out what I want to do in terms of collecting them. If I do collect them in some way, we'll figure it out. I don't want you to have to go out and bring your book to the school. I don't want to promote social gathering, but I do miss you. And if you have any questions, please email me, okay? I'm trying to stay up to date on discussion boards and stuff. It's been a little crazy, but I miss you guys. I'll see you soon. Bye.